Good morning. On behalf of the NC Chamber, welcome to today's Ag Allies webinar on weather and fertilizer trends. I'm Peter Daniel Jr. with the NC Chamber. All attendees are muted to avoid any distraction during today's presentation. If time permits, we will answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. If you would like to submit a question during the meeting, please use the question and answer box. Please do not use the chat box. The recording of today's webinar will be made available to you via email within 24 hours of the webinar. Now I would like to invite Ray McKeithen, Manager of Government and Industry Affairs at Nutrien, to come to the virtual stage. In Ray's role for Nutrien, he covers a 6-state Mid-South region. His responsibilities include public affairs, advocacy, stakeholder engagement, a spokesperson, and community investment. He focuses on the company's mission of serving growers to navigate regulatory and other challenges to ensure sustainable, high-yield agronomic practices to feed the world. Ray has served as a board member of the NC Chamber and continues to be active as a member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and the Strategic Initiative Board on Business Continuity. Ray resides in Washington, North Carolina with his wife, Robin. The McKeithens have 2 sons. Holt is a recent graduate of UNC Chapel Hill, and Ben will graduate from the university in May. Ray, it's a pleasure seeing you. Thanks for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Hey, everyone, we really appreciate this. I also want to thank Ray Starling, who saw an opportunity and an idea to discuss with the Ag Allies weather trends, especially considering the incredibly wet year that we started with, as well as our fertilizer markets in which we all have a great interest. So it's our pleasure to be here today and to present to you. Peter mentioned my role. I'm involved with quite a few stakeholders and elected officials. My territory is a 6-state region, and I try to be as involved everywhere I can. And I really like these opportunities to say hey to folks and also introduce myself as well. Nutrien has a large presence in the state. In fact, we have 40 locations, and that includes our Nutrien Ag Solutions locations, as well as our phosphate mining and processing facility in Beaufort County, here where I live. In fact, North Carolina is a key state for the company. We have as far as financial investment, is the largest in North Carolina, especially when you consider our impact on the economy overall. We're an agriculture company where safety and environmental stewardship are our top priorities. And we begin all of our meetings with a safety message, and I feel today should be no different. As we all know, this is a busy time of the year with tractors and other equipment sharing the road with drivers of varying skills of dexterity and patience. As if farming isn't challenging enough already with concerns related to prices, taxes, trade issues, nuisance lawsuits, workforce, sustainability planning, succession planning, things like that. So there's a lot of things that can distract us. So I would just say, please be careful out there. Be aware of those foolish drivers who could cause a bad day for themselves and our farm workers, who are the backbone of the state's largest industry. With regard to environmental stewardship, we announced our carbon program to encourage and reward sustainable practices for growers. Let me know if you want to learn more. I'd like to introduce a pilot program in North Carolina with your input to guide us, and that's why I mentioned that at this time. And because we're the world's largest provider of crop inputs and services, what's important to growers is important to us. That's why I think it's appropriate that we have this discussion today and that we continue to share and communicate, because as we all know, those are the keys to success, and especially in building relationships that are key to all of us. Today, I'd like to start by introducing a colleague who is an expert on fertilizer markets, which are important to all of us. Clay Hackney grew up in rural North Florida, where he gained an appreciation for agriculture while working on nearby farming operations. After high school, he attended the University of Florida, where he earned a bachelor's degree in agriculture and then doubled down at the university with a master's degree in business. He went on to work for Potash Corp, which is a legacy company of Nutrien prior to our merger with Agrium. And he's gaining experience in both operations and sales over the last 18 years. Clay is married with one child and resides in Live Oak, Florida. And I will tell you this from a personal perspective. He comes from a small town, has small town roots that trace back generations. And in the past few years, he has traveled to and conducted business in more than 20 countries. And this is a person who had not been overseas until he was 34 years old. So I assume a lot of that travel was not in the past year, but let's hope we can get back to that point again soon. So I'd like to thank Clay for making himself available and for presenting to us today. Clay, I'll ask you to take it from here. And when you're done, I'll introduce Eric Snodgrass for our weather discussion.
Great. Thanks, Ray. And thanks everyone for allowing me to speak with you today. As Ray said, North Carolina is a big part of our business. Not only do we have the production facility there in Aurora, where we produce phosphates, but we also have a significant customer base there, especially in Eastern North Carolina, where we sell and market other products that we produce, including potash and nitrogen products as well. So North Carolina is an important state for us. I travel through there quite a bit in my role, and have several long-lasting relationships there today. So with that, I'll get started and hopefully be able to give you guys a little bit of insight into, you know, what's driving the fertilizer market today, what we're seeing, and depending on how involved you are in you know, fertilizer markets yourself, this may or may not sound familiar to you, but hopefully again give you some insight into that. First off, I need to start off by saying that, you know, there are some forward-looking statements. We don't make very specific forecast or call the market, so to speak, but we do talk about assumptions and things that could happen. And this is our statement, you know, somewhat just letting you know of that. And with that, we'll roll on to it and get started. Next slide. So you can't really talk about the fertilizer market and fertilizer prices without, you know, first looking at the main drivers of the business. And of course, that is the grain markets, where most of our inputs go. We also have, you know, feed and industrial businesses, but the largest, you know, portion of the company is fertilizer, and of course, grain prices drive that. So what have we seen in the grain markets here in the last year? We first off have seen a significant tightening in the grain stocks, the stocks to use ratios for both corn and soybeans. If you look back at the USDA's forecast back in the summer, the stocks to use ratios were fairly high. Crop prices were down. And then that turned around here, you know, over the last 6 months. And as you can see, the stocks to use ratios have come down significantly. More so for soybeans than I would say for corn, but both are fairly low looking comparing to historicals. You look at soybeans now at less than 5%, and back during the summer, we're sitting at 15%. You know, corn well above 20%, and now hitting around 10%. Couple of reasons for this. We have seen reduced production coming out of the grain markets in the previous year. That was, you know, some of that was due to weather, but we've also seen extraordinary demand and through exports. As you can see at the graph on the right, our exports are trending well above previous years and averages. And so you ask, well, what is causing such a a big impact in increasing these? What is the impact and what's causing this increase in exports? And I'd say in one word, one country, is China. Next slide, please. So for those of you that aren't familiar with it, China is the largest swine producer in the world. Traveling there several times myself over the last several years, I can tell you that pork is a big part of the Chinese diet, and they produce a lot of it. Well, back between somewhere around between 18 and 19, they had the onset of the African swine flu that decimated their herd. Here in the last year or two, we've had a couple things that have caused them to need to import more grain. The first being rebuilding the swine herd. They're trying to get back on their feet there, and so they're needing lots of grains to do that. A lot of soybeans, and here recently a lot more corn, as you can see from their import increases on the bottom left. And then also you can see their deficit for corn on the bottom right. The other part was the trade pact that was agreed to between the Chinese government and the Trump administration. And so with both of those, China has, as I like to say sometimes, they've turned on the spigot, and when they do, they can impact commodity prices in a big way. And this not only includes corn and bean prices, but also impacts things like iron ore, oil, palm oil, those sort of things. So China has played a big role here recently, and been a big consumer of our products, mainly corn and soybean, of course. So next slide. So what has that done? As you would expect, as markets function, a big increase in demand. We've had less production, like I said, last year. So that's driven prices up. I'm talking a lot now about beans and corn, but it's also had an impact on other commodities as well: cotton, wheat, palm oil, which is primarily grown in Southeast Asia. You've seen this, kind of rising tide lifts all boats, and it's caused commodity prices to come up quite a bit over the last 6 months. This in turn is provided a lot of optimism in the agricultural markets today. Next slide. So with the increased prices, as you would expect, grower margins are coming up, which is good for the ag sector. And not only have they seen this increase in commodity prices that is providing this optimistic outlook, but if you remember last year when COVID hit, the U.S. government provided a lot of assistance to the ag community and farmers, and that's also helped give farmers more income than they've had in several years. And actually, last year was pegged as the best year for farmer income since 2013. So with that, farmers have more money, they have more confidence. They're looking to plant more acres for this year, which planting is underway as we speak. Next slide. Just to look at the acres, as I said, with more money, more confidence, they're looking at planting more acres. We're looking at approximately 7 more million acres this year, compared to last. A big chunk of that is with soybeans, because the profitability looks a little bit better today with beans than say corn. But corn also is taking an increase, and there's in the latest USDA report, it's looking like 91 million acres of corn for this year, which there's a lot of folks in the industry that are kind of winking at that and thinking that it could be much greater than that with corn where it's at today at over $5. So these numbers could go a little bit higher. And as you can see, we have our own forecast over to the right on the far right hand column, and we say we're kind of pushing those upper limits a little bit, just taking some of that into consideration. So much more as far on the acreage front, for this coming year. And as you would expect, farmers, expect to make more money. Next slide. So put all that together. If they've got more money, they're going to plant, more crops, more acres. We're looking at a pretty big increase in farm expenditures on inputs, for this coming year. And someone who's involved in the fertilizer markets daily, I can tell you that we're seeing that. We're seeing a lot of people come in early, a lot of customers looking to buy more fertilizer, even with prices. And I'll talk about prices in a second, but even looking at what prices have done lately. So we're looking at, just for the U.S., over 4.5% of increased expenditure on crop inputs coming in this year. And again, they've got more money. They're going to plant more acres, so they're going to put more into the crop. Next slide. So talking about now fertilizer prices, the direction of the market and where it's been and where it's going. As you can see, fertilizer prices were at I would say cyclical lows in the summer of this past year in 20. And so why was that? Commodity prices were down. It's almost the opposite of what we're seeing now. Commodity prices were down. Inventories for fertilizer, the main fertilizer products were high. And so we saw depressed prices. One thing I found, being in the business, for this long, nothing stays the same forever. And sure enough, we've seen it turn around. But it all has to do with what I spoke about previously. We've got a turnaround in the grain markets. Prices are much higher than they were back during the summer, and owing to this increased demand for our grains going overseas, has caused farmers to come in and buy more fertilizer. In the fall of 20, we had a very robust application period in the Midwest. That in turn depleted inventories throughout the country. And then as prices came up even more, farmers continue to have a more positive outlook and look to secure more product. And as I said, inventories were low, and so it drove prices up. It provided that upward momentum for fertilizer prices. Now, each grouping, with K being potash, N being nitrogen, which is split between urea and UAN, and then of course phosphates is typically your DAP and MAP, which is produced right there in Aurora. They all have seen varying degrees of increases, but the trend is all the same, and it again goes all back to what we're seeing in the grain markets and in the ag economy as a whole. So as you can see on the right, prices have come up significantly in all, and I said they all have like their own little supply demand fundamentals within each of them, and they all don't go in exact unison, but the trend is definitely on the upside. Next slide. So with prices coming up, there's always this question of, how, will farmers ever cut back if prices get too high? People have speculated on that here recently as prices have climbed to highs that we haven't seen in, since 2013. But I would say by the illustration in this slide, where we compare current fertilizer prices compared to the 10-year average. And I would say they're all bumping up against that 10-year average. Maybe phosphates have crested that. But we would still say they're in the range of affordability. There's always this argument about, commodity prices versus, input cost, with fertilizer being one of those. And to a certain degree, fertilizer prices are always going to, be closely coordinated with grain prices. As you can see from the graph, they sometimes get out of whack. they'll overshoot sometimes, and then they'll undershoot depending on the actual, supply demand fundamentals within each one of those nutrients. But they all somewhat seem to revert back, to the mean at some point and stay within a certain range of affordability. So for now, we do see, even with demand being high, we do, and prices being high for fertilizer, prices are all relative, right? Again, back to grain prices. But right now, we see as fertilizer still being an affordable proposition. We still see, even with prices where they're at, we're seeing great demand for NP and K throughout our system. What does that mean going forward, and what are our forecasts going forward? It's hard to say. A lot of it depends, again, what happens in the grain markets. I do think we've had a significant run up in not only the grain prices, but in fertilizer prices. So I would say, probably our most significant gains are probably behind us. But there's several ag economists out there today that see this market with high grain prices, continuing potentially into next year and beyond. And so with that, I would say, fertilizer prices, you can make a strong case that they will continue to stay firm. Now, will they, step back and then move forward? Sure, they'll do that throughout the year. Throughout the year when you see demand trail off in the summer and those sort of things. But I would say for the foreseeable future, things look, pretty positive in both grain and fertilizer markets. So with that, that's just my coverage and my snapshot of what I'd like to share with you guys on the fertilizer markets. I could, I do this for a living, right? So I feel like sometimes I could talk about this, for much longer, but I don't want to take more than my time is allotted. But I look forward to the Q&A, and hopefully I can answer some of your questions. And with that, I will turn it over to Ray.
Okay, excellent presentation. Thank you very much, Clay. Let me remind everyone, you can post questions for our Q&A session now. So please do. I don't think we have any yet, and I'm sure there's some questions out there. Now it's my privilege to introduce another colleague, Eric Snodgrass, who is a science fellow and principal atmospheric scientist for Nutrien Ag Solutions. And apparently, according to Ray, a bit of a celebrity among those who follow his weather updates closely or attend one of the 100 conferences he presents to yearly. Eric develops tools to assess weather risk globally for farmers. He formerly worked in academia as an award-winning professor at the University of Illinois. He also co-founded 2 companies that were acquired by Nutrien Ag Solutions in 2018. That's very impressive stuff. On a personal level, he is also a car enthusiast, having restored more than 30 classics, including one that will be driven by Ward Burton in an upcoming Nutrien commercial. Eric told me that considering Burton's race history, he made sure his '69 Mercury Montego MX convertible vehicle is fully insured. Eric, once you're done, just send it back to me and we'll hand it off for Q&A. Okay. The floor is yours.
All right, I appreciate that. Let me just see if I can get on in here and share my screen. Maybe I need to be made a host here real quick. Let's see if that'll work. But yeah, I'm pretty excited to have Ward in the car. I talked to him last weekend, and he's a little guy, so I'll be interested to see how heavy that right foot is when he gets out there and scoots around. And I thought it was kind of funny too to see that picture I sent you guys. I've gotten a little hairier during COVID, and but I hope it hasn't really affected my my forecasting skill just yet. So I'm going to get over here and try to share my screen. It looks like I should be able to do this. There we go. Let me, as soon as this is up and running, if I can just get a verbal from somebody that says you can see my screen, we're in good shape. Can you see it okay?
You're good, Eric.
All right, so I asked to share my screen because I was finishing slides just a few minutes before this, got the latest weather information in here for you. And here we are in spring, and it's that time of year where the atmosphere really begins to overturn a lot in that thunderstorm complex you see off there in the distance. Now, that was in the high plains. That wasn't in North Carolina, but you get storms just like this all the time. By the way, something for you to know about a storm complex like this. It doesn't look like much, right? I mean, you can see the whole thing west to east and top to bottom here. But a storm system like the one that you're watching right here actually contains more energy inside of it just in the production of clouds, okay? More energy just in the production of clouds than we have in the entire US nuclear arsenal. So it's no wonder when storms like this begin to erupt and they produce, like you see here in this video, this was now in Silas, Alabama, back in mid-March, they can produce some pretty incredible weather. And you're here in a drone flown by Brian here, right up into one of these tornadoes here. The South has been absolutely lit up here with severe weather. I want to point you toward a resource I want everyone to take down with me. It's right up here. I'll put an arrow next to it, spc.noaa.gov. We're moving now firmly into the time period where we expect to see a lot of active severe weather. And that's a resource that you can use, that I use every day in my reports, that kind of points to where we can watch for our most active severe weather. Now, just speaking of the South, I want you to think about the lower Mississippi River Valley. I know that's outside of North Carolina, but listen, this is an area that we expect to plant very quickly this time of year, but they've had so much severe weather, including back-to-back high-risk days. That's extremely rare. We normally have a high risk day once every other year. We had 2 of them in the month of March. And because of that, just another stat to give you here, we have moved ourselves back up to the normal rate of accumulation or tornado reports. Now, this graphic here shows you the last 15 years, and that solid black line would be average. The red one on the bottom is where we currently stand this year. And what I'd like to make a point about is here we are at this point in April. You see how the slope of this line increases pretty dramatically between April, May, and June? That is the time period that we're going into this next 60 days or so, where we see a lot of active severe weather across the United States. And let's just keep that tucked away in the back of our minds. Now, how about a 30-second recap of winter? We had one outstanding event that happened in February. And the map you're staring at here showed you what happened between February 8th and the 23rd in terms of temperature differences from normal. That's right, the midsection of the country here witnessed minus 30 to minus 40 degree weather. And as that cold air came through, take a look at what happened in Texas. I'll show you this for North Carolina in a second. Last 6 months, see that dashed line? That'd be your average temperature, okay? This was the Arctic outbreak that happened in Texas. And as it came through, you've heard all the stories about the burst pipes and the damage done to the infrastructure. I'm just going to put one point to this story that I'm telling you about this event from 2020, okay? And the point is that when this cold snap came through and did the destruction it did throughout the plains, getting into all the way down to the Gulf Coast, even into Mexico, all right? What's going to be interesting about this is they tally up the damages. Well, this is a list right here of the most expensive weather disasters in US history. And you can see that the top six list here, they're all hurricanes: Katrina, Harvey, Maria, Sandy, Irma, and Andrew. Right now, the current thinking is that Arctic outbreak could be the new #2 behind Hurricane Katrina, which cost the United States $170 billion. So don't forget that about this particular event. Now, oops, sorry, I pushed the wrong button there. Let me go back into that presentation and let me show you this. This is what it's looked like across the state of North Carolina. If you have felt as though you have been on an absolute roller coaster ride with temperatures, the data perfectly paint that for you. All those red spikes up were those week to 10 days when we get this nice warm conditions followed by a big shot at cooler air, like the one we had right here at the beginning of April. And that was a bit uncharacteristic because look at what it did on April 2nd and 3rd to our low temperatures. Now just think about this. We brought enough cold air in the morning, this would be Friday morning, April 2nd, where we got a frost all the way down to northern Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. And they got pretty far here, almost to the coastal plain on that Friday morning. And then look at Saturday. That's the map that's over here on the right. By Saturday, nearly the entire state on April 3rd saw a sub-freezing temperature early in the morning. And you say, well, I think we understand the effect of that, but let me just show you something. Our normal last date of a frost, if you just look here, just look at this closely, we would see that our normal color shading, we're in here at the end of March. So to get it here into April and see those sub-freezing temperatures, that was about a week or so late. Big question is, are we going to continue to see this cooler weather move through? Now, in the midsection of the country, for you corn and soybean farmers that are on this call, I want to let you know something. We've shut her down. You can see that over the next 10 days, we've got cool weather stretching through the plains, all the way through the primary corn and soybean belt. These temperatures are sending our soil temperatures back down there below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And by the way, it's snowing like mad today in parts of southern Saskatchewan, Manitoba, North Dakota, and Montana. So we're getting a lot of snow in this area. So it's quite cold and it's going to be cold. So they're not going to go back after planting here in this area probably until we get past the third week of the month of April. And so not a lot of early activity due to this cold weather that's coming through over the next 10 days. You see the gray on this map shows where we're expecting a frost. And as you can tell, we're going to be getting some pretty chilly temperatures through the midsection of the country. And possibly on the 23rd, we could hit this section here with a frost. My map only goes to the 22nd at this point, looking out over the next 10 days. Now, I'm not concerned about you all. What I'm concerned about here is just this is just going to keep us from really going aggressively after an early plant here in the primary corn and soybean belt. Things break once we get out past the 22nd, 23rd, and this is the temperature pattern leading into that final week of April. And while you see here like, oh, I don't want to see blues, I'll just tell you something. Even though you see the cooler shading here, we're just barely on this side of cooler than normal. So I'm not calling for that like Arctic blast we can sometimes get here, at this point in April. And I actually expect the temperatures to be much closer to normal for you. If there's a shot at cool air, it's just that. It's a shot at cool air that's coming through your area. Now, getting into the beginning of May, notice that the cold air in the models begins to retreat. This is looking again at temperatures compared to normal. And if I just kind of draw a line here, you go anywhere south of that line, and of course that includes us over here in the mid-Atlantic, scooting down through the Carolinas, we are expecting to see a pretty quick accumulation of those heat units in early May. So the crop, which has been delayed a bit because of rain, we'll see that in a second, and some time periods of some cooler weather could get a good jump on it here as we get into the early May time period. Now let's talk precipitation, then we look long-term, and I'll turn it back over to Ray here. No joke about this wet weather. This is January 1st through April 13th, and there's a number inside of every climate reporting district. And that number represents where you sit on the 129-year rank. So you see this 13th, 19th, 15th, or 9th? That means this climate district right in through here just had the 9th wettest start to the year in 129 years. But you might also take note of a few things. It's been dry in Texas, very dry out west, dry in the northern plains, dry in the northeast as well. And even though a lot of snow and rain came through the midsection of the country to beat back the drought, we're still dealing with quite a bit of drought across the country. This is our latest drought monitor. 60% of the United States is covered in some form of drought. In fact, it's 65%. I was a little bit under there. Even though we don't see it over here in the mid-Atlantic through the Carolinas, the drought is quite prolific around the rest of the country. A couple of things to take note of when you see this. North Dakota just had its driest start to the year. Actually, the driest last 6 months in history of keeping weather records in North Dakota. California had its driest wet season in the last 40 years and the fourth driest in the last 129. And the drought in the Great Basin is extensive. Now, a lot of folks are saying, are we going to see a repeat of 2012? That's always getting asked to me. Remember what happened in 2012? We had drought down here too. And the drought wasn't nearly as bad in the northern plains or even in the Four Corners states. So this scenario was much different than what we had in 2012, but the risk in the midsection of the country is relatively high. Now, there's been no doubt across North Carolina, you've been wet. This is looking back over the last 6 months. See that solid line running right through the middle there? That's your average rate of accumulation for the state on rainfall. The green shading tells you where you've been. And right now we're looking at the 6th wettest last 6 months on record. And this has really chased us out of the fields and hurt us early in the season, getting a lot of work done. And then the cold snap at the beginning of April didn't help either. So I understand some of the pain that we're feeling here in the state of North Carolina. Well, when's our next shot at some precip? Let's get into a quick near-term forecast. Tonight, all the action is going to be down south in the lower Mississippi River Valley. So what are we expecting going through the day on Wednesday here? we are expecting some scattered showers and storms to be coming across our area as we get into the Wednesday evening time frame as this first system kind of moves on through. It's not the situation where everybody gets rain. It's just going to be some scattered showers and storms. Some of those storms, just letting you know, could pack a little bit of a punch. But here's what the next 10 days looks like. All the action's pretty far south along the Gulf Coast, and we're actually going to be drier over the next 10 days while all that colder weather is setting up shop in the midsection of the country. I think you're going to be making quite a few strides here on finishing things up and also seeing some more favorable conditions as we work our way through the end of the month of April. Now, looking longer term, I told you at the beginning, I'm concerned about severe weather. I'm going to tell you why. This is what the jet stream's doing. It's breaking up over the west and diving down here by the time we get out here to the end of the month. But a subtropical component of this jet stream starts to show its ugly head again. And that tends to give us a very active, I know it's a large area I'm circling there, but a very active go of it on our strong to severe storms. So you see that last week of April, okay, yeah, the next 10 days are looking good, but the last week of April does favor an increase in shower and thunderstorm activity. And again, some of this could be on the severe side of things. In my last 3 minutes here, let's stretch this out and look longer term. And then, by the way, if you got questions, not only about North Carolina, but if you want to talk about South America, we can get to those in a few moments because those are still going to, I think, work in our markets. This animation, and I hope it's playing smoothly for you, shows you what happened at the end of last year and the beginning of this year with our La Nina. That blue water, that color you see there in the midsection of the Pacific Ocean was our La Nina, and it has faded pretty hard. We do not expect it to make a return. So the zero line, we'll call that INSO neutral, which means neither El Nino or La Nina. We're going toward it over the coming weeks. So we're going to spend much of this spring, summer, and early fall here. No El Nino is currently forecast, and no big resurgence of La Nina is being forecast either. So what does all that mean? Well, in a nutshell, we've got two things to be watching. You see all this cool water here? Sorry, let me get my drawing back on there. There you go. See that cool water in place in this area? Now, the La Nina is down here. Ignore it. The cool water you see here and in the Gulf of Alaska, that is a specific configuration of ocean temperatures we call the negative Pacific Meridianal mode. All right, that's jargon in my field for saying it's cold on the West Coast. Last time it did that was 9 years ago. That tends to increase risk of drought in the midsection of the country. All right. Notice the Atlantic, though. This is the second point. We got quite a bit of warm water compared to normal there. And again, La Nina's out of the question. Okay. Why talk about it? Well, I know I'm getting here at the end of my talk, but look at this. Something called the Pacific Meridional mode. Remember, we just talked about that? This is the time series going back to 1980. And I got folks in the Midwest that are scared of this because this is overlaid now with yield anomalies in the state of Iowa. And you see what I see? Whenever the Pacific Meridional mode is positive, we tend to do okay on yields. When it's negative, we tend to not do so well. So there's a lot of concern about that because when we have a positive Pacific Meridional mode, it tends to be wet in this area. We don't have that. We've got a negative Pacific Meridional mode. So there's concern about this upcoming summer in the Midwest for drought. Now you say, Snodgrass, why are you going over all this about the Midwest? Because that's where the prices on some of those big commodities are going to be set. We just heard what was going on with fertilizer demand and how it seems to be tied with commodity prices. That's common. I expect them to stay at this level simply due to what we're anticipating for this upcoming year with risk on drought. So let's finish this up. We're going to go through this pretty quickly here. May, June, July. Ready? That's May temperature anomalies. We're talking now June and July. Do you see, as I saw, that the heat tends to stay in the central United States and west? We see more normal summer temperatures here for us as we get into July. What about talking about precipitation? Well, May, you're looking at normal spring rain and thunderstorms. Going into June, it looks to be wetter than normal in your area. Going into July, we see that as well. The dryness seems to be anchored. I'll just show you all months combined in the midsection of the country getting to the northwest. What I'm going to be watching for most carefully here is going to be the risk of hurricanes. And in my last 30 seconds, let's just talk about that because we continue to see, looking out there in the forecast, above normal temperatures here. And then take a look at this. As we get out in July, August, September, see how the models are trying to put this over toward wet? The main reason they're doing that is because of this. See that big high right there? You see the yellow shading, I guess that's a yellow on the western side of it. That is increased high pressure in that area, meaning systems are going to be pushed farther to the east this year than they would be otherwise, given the strength of that high that's over the Atlantic. So here's my last 30 seconds. Typical tropical cyclone tracks, see them all overlaid here? They come in a direction like this, don't they? Well, the bigger that high is, the farther to the east they can get, or excuse me, to the west they can get pushed. And 2020 was a rough year across the whole of the country here that deals with hurricanes. One of the ones I remember most was Hurricane Isaias, which came through and did a lot of damage, just barely under the threshold of it triggering some insurance payouts. But as it came through, and we forecast about 8 days before it arrived, it coming through, it did quite a bit of damage, as you can see here on radar. Now, what I want to share with you as I wrap this up is our forecast for this upcoming hurricane season matches what just came out from Colorado State. We're looking at about 17 named systems. Normal is 12. That's about 150% of normal on our accumulated energy from these systems. And I do believe that the East Coast and the Gulf Coast are going to have another year where we're going to be watching the Atlantic carefully and the Gulf carefully for tropical cyclones. Hey, one last thing. If you'd like to get my weather reports for free, I'll put this in the chat. You can just go to this website, info.nutrien.com/snodgrass weather. I produce these daily reports that go out and just kind of keep you clued in on what's going on with the weather. But I have now effectively stolen 3 extra minutes this morning. I apologize for that. Let's turn it back over to you, Ray, and then we will we'll get going with some Q&A.
Thanks, Eric.
Those 3 extra minutes were worth it. Let me ask you, I have to ask you this because everybody is wondering whether they're asking you or not. But, you know, we talk about the anomalies, we talk about extremes, we see all these weird weather patterns. What of this is related to climate change? And thank you for not rolling your eyes when I asked that question, because you must hear it time. But can you address that real quickly, or are
Absolutely.
these year-by-year events?
You know, when we look at the longer term signals in the climate, and so this is me studying about 70 years worth of data we have across the country. Okay, when we try to define climate change in the Midwest where I live, we've actually been getting wetter and wetter and wetter. And to be honest, so have you all. You get east of the Mississippi River, the longer term trend is increased precipitation variability. My home state of Illinois, we have actually increased our annual rainfall by about 5.5 inches. And we've tripled the frequency of our heavy rainfall events, which is making farming a little bit more difficult here, especially getting in the field, getting work done. The worst risk is west. You get on the other side of the Rocky Mountains, get over there to California, the Pacific Northwest. They are seeing a very, very substantial increase in summer heat. They're seeing a decrease in their winter precipitation, and it's hitting the crops in the western part of the United States hard. And it's no surprise to those folks at all. That's really what climate change is. The thing I'm most concerned about for us in the Carolinas is we have been measuring over the last 40 years an increase in total heat content in the Atlantic Ocean. And you increase that, any would-be tropical system that comes across the Atlantic just has more of a reservoir of energy to extract, to give us a Florence, to give us a Michael, to give us an Isaias last year, that really puts down the heavy rains and causes our flooding issues. North Carolina, you've also doubled the frequency of your heavy rainfall events as well. And so what it does is it just changes the way we manage soil health to be more resilient to these things. And to be honest, in the state of North Carolina, the region that's most susceptible is the closer you get to the Cape. That ground there, right on the coastal plain, right up next to the ocean, is just more vulnerable due to how, it just slopes into the ocean, right? And it's just more vulnerable to seawater inundation. Now, that was a 6-hour lecture in 2 minutes. So there you go.
You did very good. And I set you up on that one. But thank you. I get the sense you enjoy your work, and that comes across. So thank you for that. Now I'll hand off to Peter, who is going to moderate Q&A session. And I think we're going to.
Thanks, Ray. We've got a few minutes, and I've got a question for Clay that's come in. And Ray, could you mute? Thanks, Ray. Clay, are you there?
I am.
Hey, Clay. So I've got a question about the impacts of the recent countervailing duties on the fertilizer market in terms of phosphate imported from Russia and Morocco. Do you think that's going to have any impact on the domestic market here?
Yeah, so initially it has. And you know, we saw phosphate fertilizer prices rise, you know, from the summer, about the time those duties were being discussed. You saw Morocco and Russian producers, you know, pull back out of the market, kind of just to watch what was going to happen there. The kind of perfect storm there, though, was that there was just this huge fall application period in the Midwest, and it completely depleted inventories that were there. So not only did you have less imports coming in, but then you had you know, robust demand and low inventory. So that started the initial, you know, upswing in phosphate or DAP and MAP prices. But looking ahead, what that does long term, and first let me say, as a company, Nutrien, we're neutral in this. We did not get involved with the suit, but obviously we produce, and so we watch it pretty closely. What I would say is that this country can produce, the producers here can produce everything that is needed in the North American market. You look at the demand at around 9-ish, you know, million tons, and we have capacity for over 11 million tons. So we can provide what this market needs. What I think you'll see, and we're already seeing it, is you'll just see trade patterns adjust. I think one of the initial shocks, me personally, is that when this happened, you know, these long held trade patterns that were in place were, you know, you could say disrupted somewhat. You know, you got another 3 million tons of product that was not coming into the U.S. So and mainly to the Gulf. And so that was gone, but you have other producers in the world, right? You have Saudi Arabia, you have Mexico, you have Australia, you know, Jordan. So you have others. I think once all of that adjusts, I don't think it'll have near the impact that people initially thought. And I think everything will work itself out, you know, personally. Again, we have plenty of production here. The North American producers do. You know, you got, you know, Mosaic, our competitor. They produce, you know, quite a bit more. They're more heavily into the phosphate trade. You know, I cut my teeth in the phosphate business right out of college. My dad's been in the business, or was in the business, for over 40 years at the one of the plants that we have in Florida. So I have kind of a front row seat on phosphates, and have watched it my entire life. I think it will adjust. I really do. I don't see longer term next year having the main issues. I think the biggest impact, or the biggest driver for phosphates going forward, will be commodity prices. I really do think that you'll see these trade patterns adjust, and it'll work itself out.
I appreciate that, Clay, and thanks again for the fantastic presentation. We have time for one more question. I'm going to direct this one to Eric. Farmers are already planting corn. You think it's too early? You talked a little bit about it. Is there going to be another frost, or are they going to be rewarded for rolling the dice this year? Do you think there's going to be another frost in North Carolina?
At this stage, the likelihood is relatively limited based on historical evidence, and then also thinking about the pattern that's coming up. I'll be honest, if we're able to get past about April 22nd, 23rd, I think the risk of that is now very, very low. Now, I say that remembering, if you remember last year, May 7th through the 10th or 11th, we had a pretty big shot of cold air that came through. And yes, it did get over toward the Appalachian Mountains. In fact, it really stunted things. Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. The extent of that cool weather did make it to the East Coast. But at this point, I think about the pattern that's evolving. I think about we're going to see some cool weather. It's going to cool down, but the difference maker is, does it cool down to 32 or does it cool down to 38? You know, and at that point, you know, you can go after it pretty aggressively. So I would say that the risk is diminishing every day with the forecast that I'm seeing.
That's good news, Eric. And once again, thank you so much for your presentation. I thought it was very worthwhile. We appreciate Ray and Clay, and as long as you, Eric, for being on here today. And I'm going to close us out with a poll. You're going to see a poll now to rate today's event. We appreciate any and all feedback you have. We want to make these events better and make them more worth your time. We appreciate you being with us today and hope you stay safe and healthy during this time, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.